at least at the beginning, I wasn't doing this for a financial requirement.
Mhm.
I was doing this simply to find out what it was like.
Mhm.
Um, it had eventually transitioned into a financial requirement, and at that point, um, the desperation starts to kind of bleed through.
Maybe let's start with how you got into doing sex work and then.
We could. Well, it started from a general curiosity, and that general curiosity came with the desire to get drugs. So, as we discussed in the past, I had gotten into crystal meth, and this was about February of 2021 was when I started engaging with it. And at that point, I was just kind of feeling everything out, but I was cross-dressing, I was engaging with other people, I was getting hotel rooms. It's probably around that time this year was when I started getting into prostitution specifically. What interested me about it was one, making money. Obviously with drugs, you kind of have this financial drain. With me getting hotel rooms on top of which, there's that additional cost that comes with it. And then there's all the kind of ancillary drugs that come with crystal meth. There's GHB, there's Molly, or MDMA.
What were you getting the hotel rooms for? To party?
We get to party, yeah. I mean, I was with my fiance at the time, and it's nice to kind of have that separation. I had a place that I could go home to where all of this world wasn't involved with me. And then I could kind of step into it, literally like not even a mile away, and go to some seedy motel and then engage with this community. But it had interested me because the presentation just seemed it was polished. They seemed like they knew what they were doing. There was confidence behind it. And that was something that I had always lacked, which I thought I'd kind of gained back when I began becoming Jen. But I quickly realized it was more of a facade. And obviously, well, I guess it's not obvious, but it is more of a facade for them as well. It's just you're selling a product and you have to believe in that product.
Mhm.
That was always my flaw, was I never necessarily believed in the product. I always just kind of put my attitude into it and hope for the best.
Mhm.
So I wasn't as successful, but it was fun.
You mean as successful with the sex work? Or?
Yes. Yeah, so I probably talked my way out of business more often than not, just because I didn't want to do anything I didn't want to do, and I think that's generally the attitude. One of the first things that I was told was, don't do anything you don't want to do. And usually that went with, kind of outrageous or outlandish sexual requests. But for me, it became more, what do I feel like at the moment? And at least at the beginning, I wasn't doing this for a financial requirement.
Mhm.
I was doing this simply to find out what it was like.
Mhm.
It had eventually transitioned into a financial requirement. And at that point, the desperation starts to kind of bleed through. And when that takes place, it gets kind of sniffed out. People are kind of reticent of that. I don't know if that's the right word. People are responsive. They notice that you're in need of, the money. So they're going to behave a certain way. They're going to make it more difficult for you. They're going to kind of demand more, knowing that you're going to kind of accept that. And I don't know if it's necessarily a conscious behavior on their part or just their response to certain, social cues or tics that go to show that, this person's willing to do a lot more stuff than they normally would.
So when you got there, to that point, was there things that you would have normally said no to that you said yes to?
I want to apologize for the interruption. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It really helps out the channel and you'll never miss an episode.
Strangely enough, no. I was open to a lot of stuff. Yeah, it's funny. Like, it's funny because like you say you're open to pretty much everything, but it's all dependent upon the mood. If you're upset, you're not open to anything. If you're feeling apprehensive, you're only open to a few things. Oftentimes, I would tell these guys, look, get over here. We'll kind of just play it by ear. Just hang out. I'm not gonna charge anything. We'll just get to know one another.
Mm-hmm.
If everything works out and we start to kind of do something, then we can discuss everything then. And oftentimes I found if they were accepting of that and they weren't kind of in a rush to make something happen, that they would be more likely to stay within certain boundaries.
What do you mean by stay within the same boundaries?
Whatever boundaries that I had applied at that time, because the consent culture has made this completely different. I assume there was a time where you didn't have consent, and that was a little more, once they walked through the door, anything could happen.
Yeah.
Consent's very important nowadays. And even in, with sex workers, you find that the people that are soliciting the sex workers are still making sure that they're respecting that consent, which I always thought was weird if it was a person you were never going to see again. but maybe that's just my own personality bleeding through. But I thought it strange that they were concerned about that behavior, considering most of the time I never saw these individuals again. And I think that comes from like an image thing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, right? They don't want to see themselves as a bad person or something like that, right?
Right. That was the one thing that I kind of noticed about this whole thing is the gentlemen that were specifically seeking trans women, they were upset with their wives.
Oh, really?
Well, they were married and then upset with their wives.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, I can't say that it was every time. But yeah, it was pervasive.
Huh. Okay. So most of your clients were male? Or were they-
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you would get the occasional couple.
Mhm.
Let me rephrase that. Some would get a couple. Some would get a woman. I was pretty much all men,
Oh, really?
and that was the vibe I was putting out too. I was interested in men exclusively.
But you normally date women, or
Yes. So it's,
why is that?
well, for one, it's kind of the dichotomy that I produced. There was the person that I kind of, I'm out on the street and when I'm dressed up as Jen, and she's definitely more responsive to masculinity. Like if they want to put something up their butt, if they want to put on panties, that's their business. I'm not interested in it. I'll engage it for money, but it's not something that I'm going to seek out. And that was something that I found later on. It wasn't something immediate. It took me about 6 months of meeting people to find that I wasn't really I was still into trans women in the way that I would be into normal women, but I wasn't into them exclusively because of them having a penis. So I kind of like diverged at that point, and they kind of fell into the category of women exclusively, which is more appropriate. And then men became something different, and that approval probably came from like a father figure need or something.
When was the moment did you realize that? Was it when you were having sex, or were you thinking back on it, or?
It was thinking back on it. It was thinking back on it while kind of searching, on the internet. And I realized that I wasn't interested in a certain characteristic anymore, which was like the dressed up cross-dressing. It wasn't something, it didn't have the appeal that it once had, which was someone that was essentially behaving like me. But also I wasn't kind of cross-dressing anymore. I was more identifying in a different fashion. And because of that identity shift, I found that the desires had also changed with that. And that's around when it kind of everything split. And I started to, represent a lot more as Jen specifically, and then keep my masculine self in a different category.
Just out of curiosity, do you think there was at first maybe when you started doing it, there was some taboo factor, and then after a while it became normal, and so you're like, you know what? Before everything was appealing because it was taboo, and now this is what I actually like.
Well, that's funny.
some self-discovery.
That's exactly what it was. I was fetishizing the shame in cross-dressing, but then when it kind of normalized for me, especially once I met a lot more people, and once I stopped giving a shit, then it no longer held that taboo. Once it no longer held that taboo, it was just something that I was presenting because I liked the person that I had created. I had the opportunity to design somebody from whole cloth, having spent 36 years on this earth already. It's like you grow up and you try to kind of create your own identity, but then you have all the baggage that came with it beforehand that is applied to that. And this was an opportunity to do that same thing of a different gender without the corresponding baggage. It also assisted that a lot of the people that I met at night were not the same people that I knew during the day, and they very rarely kind of crossed paths.
So, you said most of your clients were married, right?
That was my understanding.
How did that come about? Would they start talking about it, or?
Oftentimes, yes. They would just mention, well, there's the ring tan. You would notice that they had removed a wedding ring. Additionally, they would, put they would have the wedding ring with them in a wallet or something like that. So they'd go to, pay you or something, and they'd see a ring in there. And then sometimes they just talk about it. They just, have problems with their wife, and they wanted someone to vent to. And then eventually, fuck.
Yeah. They would vent you?
Yeah. Yeah, it was more. The funniest thing about it is a lot of times you're not there just to get a nut off, so to speak. You're there for camaraderie, but that's not what I'm going for. You're there to have someone that they can relate to and talk to that will not have any kind of correlation with their personal life. They're going to step into that hotel room, do whatever they want, say whatever they want, and then step out of it. And then everything that happened in there will be washed away. It's like a confessional booth in that sense.
Yeah, at first I was thinking a therapy session / nutting session.
Well, it's funny because I was always kind of the therapist type. I'm a very solutions-oriented person. So when they would tell me these problems with their wives, I would say, well, had you considered this option? Or maybe you should do that. And sometimes it helped. I mean, I gave a couple guys advice to where if they had followed it, I was pretty confident that they would be able to repair things with their wives had they wanted to do that.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever have repeat clients?
Not really.
I was hoping you would say that, yeah, I did, and want to fix it with his wife or something. I guess he wouldn't be back seeing you if he fixed it with his wife.
Right. It was kind of a, I guess you would want to avoid helping them with their lives, because then if their lives were, complete and fulfilling, then they wouldn't come and see you.
Mm-hmm. Mm. How would you post your ads?
So before, and when I was just a teenager, Craigslist was kind of a hookup site.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would have certain phrases that would ensue that you were, soliciting. They have another one, Double List now, which is kind of the same thing, but it's specific to hooking up. And they have a pretty strict policy against solicitation, but obviously there's ways to kind of circumvent the system.
Mm-hmm.
They do have, a lot of these places now have, you can't just post something. You have to post it, and then it has to get reviewed. Any photo, dating sites do this too, any photo has to be kind of checked to make sure that it's acceptable. Any post has to be reviewed. I think a lot of them are done with like an OCR technology or something to scan for certain words, because you can use different characters and kind of disconnect whatever phrase you're going for to deliver the message that you're going for without triggering that system. But I'm not sure how all that works. I just know that if you're using the money sign for an S, you can usually get away with certain things.
And so what would can you tell us what you would use to indicate?
It was kind of the obvious stuff, like the at symbol would be the A, the money symbol would be the S, there'd be a period in the middle of the word or something like that, just kind of just enough to break it up that it doesn't have to be the same thing. It just has to cut through there in a different character enough so that it didn't trigger, if you put the word fuck, it would look for 4 letters, F-U-C-K.
Yeah.
So if you put like a dash between them, then it's it's nothing.
Okay, so how did you come up with pricing?
Just looked at everyone else, kind of went off of what the standard was. So you go to a website, oftentimes it'll say what their hour rate is, what full service girlfriend experience. It'll kind of break down the different services and time frames, and how much they would charge for it. So I typically went off of that, and they were pretty. It pretty much just came down to how passable you were, just with the trans girls. Like if you looked like a woman, it was very likely that you were charging a high dollar. Also being able to perform, that was never something that I was good at. I was all bottom, so like performing was always something that I could do with a strap on, but I never really engaged in with a man sexually.
Was not expecting that.
Well, it's funny because like when in personal lives you see that that's pretty prevalent, and I figured out I started doing that myself recently. Once I got away from this life and got away from the pressures of like performing and kind of being able to be erect when upon command, I found it was easier to do so. But when I was kind of out on the street, the desire was, hey, I would like you to get hard. I would like to suck you or have you inside of me. And I don't know, I don't really find men attractive in that regard. I don't like a subservient man, sexually speaking. So for me, there was really no desire to engage with that. I tried to kind of put it in the ad, but I'd still get that question.
So how did you gain confidence with your feminine self?
Men. I just engaged with men, and they would have sweet things to say. I know it sounds so cheesy, but honest truth is like you don't get many compliments as a man for your appearance. I mean, I did, not to boast or anything, but like it was also seemed like it wasn't as women have to present themselves. Men just kind of get up and go, So like to get perceived as attractive as a woman, especially like changing myself from a man to a woman, meant that I was presenting myself, and specifically I was presenting myself from a different origin. So that felt to me as more authentic. It was more difficult for me to get to this point. For them to acknowledge that felt more, it built more self-esteem, was what I found. That was in conjunction with, this is going to sound kind of disgusting, getting men to come. There's something to be said for the mental aspect of the orgasm. And with I keep falling. And with men, like you think that it's just getting a nut off, but there is a lot that goes into it mentally, especially if they're on drugs. For them to get to that point of climax requires them to be kind of focused but also kind of letting go, almost like a fugue state, if you will. And to get someone to that point, it takes a little bit of skill. You have to figure out what they're looking for and what they want, create it, become it, and administer it, I guess. So yeah, with that having that ability to become a man's fantasy was something that I prided myself on.
Having sex with strangers too, if I could just be really open about this, I feel like
Mhm.
having sex with strangers and coming is such a difficult task too, because I feel like most people, whether they like to acknowledge it or not, are like semi-demisexual, where it's like there needs to be some type of I feel safe and I feel comfortable around you to like let that happen. And so
To speak on that, if you're going into a hotel room that you've never been to meet a person that you've never encountered before,
Mhm.
any number of things can happen, and your mind always goes to the worst. So to feel like legitimately comfortable to that point, to be able to climax, it requires a certain degree of trust in that individual, and it's really not even trust; it's faith, because
Mhm.
trust implies that you've got some prior knowledge to help with to build that trust.
Mhm.
Faith is more you don't know anything, but you're entrusting that everything's going to work out.
Mhm.
So that's part of it. Is the moment that you become kind of threatening or hostile, you're probably not going to encounter anyone.
What was your most frequent request when you were doing sex work?
Condomless anal sex.
Mhm.
And I always thought this was hilarious because I demanded condoms. That was just my thing. And every single guy would say the same thing, which is, I get it. I know that these other guys are dirty. Yeah, they're disgusting. They're the ones you want to wear condoms with. Me, however, I'm fine. I'm all clean. And I just be like, oh, sorry. I guess we'll just confirm that or make sure that we don't have to worry about that with the condom.
Mhm.
But oftentimes it was that kind of what they call the breeding fetish. They wanted to fucking come inside of you.
You stopped your sex work now.
I have.
Would you go back to it?
It's something that I've been struggling with because I could see it being a slippery slope.
Mm.
The moment that it becomes an income that I rely upon is the moment that it becomes threatening for me. And currently I would rely upon it. So I can't do it. I can't even engage that. Ideally, just for my personal benefit, what I would like to do is get to a point where I'm financially stable and responsible enough to where I can engage it and specifically seek out something kind of niche, something kind of more specific to what I like.
Mhm.
And at which point it doesn't even seem like it's worth it to charge money. Like I may as well
But
just
still
find
get paid for it.
right. Like I may as well just like find someone who likes the same things as I do and hook up. So at that point, I think it would just kind of be, it would be academic, or it would be like a buy dinner or buy the hotel room or something like that.
Yeah, that was something else I was thinking about. Was it kind of empowering to be asking for money for sex?
Yes, it was empowering in the sense of like, I got some stories. The one that I have is I was in the city, and it was like 7 or 8 a.m. and it was near the airport, and this gentleman had contacted me like an hour beforehand and just said, "Look, I've got this money, and then this is what I want." And I kind of like messed around with him a little bit just to kind of see how he would react. Like part of it is you want to kind of poke the bear and see if the bear's going to growl. If people start getting really upset, you know that you don't want to mess with that person. And especially if you're talking about 6 a.m, is this a person that just woke up for work, or is this a person that's been up all night doing drugs? So he was, after poking the bear a little bit, he was just like, "Look, let me come by, let me just get this taken care of." So he came in, and I was sharing the hotel room with a couple people, but they were asleep. So I brought them into the bathroom and gave them a blowjob for what could have been a minute and a half. And he finished, and he left. And that felt empowering because it was like, I just made $100 instantaneously. And I'm stepping away from this job, I stepped in, I did what I had to do, I got paid, and I got out, and there's an empowerment in that ability to kind of generate income from something that you can then separate with. And I don't know why it's so empowering, but you really do get kind of confidence from income, essentially. Once you've done this a few times, it's the money becomes an acknowledgement of success, which makes sense. I think it's that way with everything. And in this regard, that success comes from your sexuality, and sexuality has a lot to do with identity. So your identity would be tied into this position that you would put yourself in. So if you got rejected, or if for whatever reason the person just looked at you and didn't want you, that would be kind of disappointing as compared to the other end, which is if you got this person to finish and you got paid on it, then you feel good about yourself.
Yeah, the dopamine swing, I cannot imagine.
It's real. It's intense because towards the end of it, once I was kind of on my own, a lot of my sexuality kind of shifted. It kind of neutered itself. It just became like a shell of its former self. Nothing felt as intense anymore. I think it was just because of like a dopamine overload. But essentially, what I came out as was nowhere near as like obsessed as I was before, which seems like it's a good thing, but also kind of means that every time I'm in that scenario, it's never going to be like it was before. It's the same thing as drugs, you know. It's you'll never get that high again. So
That's what it sounded like right when you said that. I was like, oh, that sounds like such an addict statement. And there's so many things in what you've said tonight where I'm like, oh wow, like because I also come from like a line of addiction and I've had my own addictive like problems, and so like when you say things like the well, what do I call it? Like having a boundary for like self-control or something like that, where you're like, no, you've had enough, and like cut yourself off, right? I feel like people with addicts, like with addiction issues, really don't have that, right? And same with ADHD people too, they don't have that limit where they can tell themselves like no, right? And so when you're like, oh, I can't start with sex work again because I know it evolved into like a whole other thing, right? That's like one of the things I thought about.
it's funny. Regarding the boundaries, it's the same thing as with addicts. You establish these boundaries and then quickly break them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and hopefully it's for money. Hopefully you're just getting more money for it. But more often than not, you're just in the scenario going, you know, screw it, it's fine. You know, let's do this. That was kind of more the commonality that I found. You know, with realistically, anal sex for me isn't all that fun. You know, it's something that I had to get used to, and even in getting used to it, it's still to a certain degree uncomfortable. But I've done it a bunch of times because that's what they're looking for, and that's what I want to deliver. So that was probably where I would say, like, I went into prostitution thinking that I was only going to do blowjobs. That wasn't the case. So it is what it is. I've learned to enjoy it. I've learned to kind of embrace it, but I quickly realized that I kind of set boundaries for myself that I had no intention of maintaining. And that's kind of the reason that when you get yourself into that life and that career, that addict mindset is fed by it, and also is a threat to your own personal stability.
Well-being, everything.
Yeah.
Just in general, everything. Yeah.
Yeah, but then not even going into like the danger that comes with it. Like if you're just, this is all just talking about yourself. There's the external forces are something completely different, and realistically, I didn't even think about those. Like I carried a little, it was like a razor blade that's used to kind of shave the sides of your face. I'd carry one of those around in case of emergency, and I never had to use it, but
By emergency, what do you mean?
someone tried to, I don't know, take something. The way to think about it is like your body is a commodity. It's just selling, you know, pretty straightforward. Some people don't want to pay for that commodity. Sometimes they just want to take it. And if they want to take it, then you can defend it. Or not defend it and just do it, but